My name is Roger Ottiwill, in case you don't know, and along with Barry Sherlock, I'm a joint organiser of these monthly hands-on local history presentations. It now gives me great pleasure just to say a few words by way of introduction to Jean's presentation. First, let me repeat my earlier welcome, and especially to those of you who are joining us for the first time, including Pauline Hedges and other members of Newnham Parish Council, and anyone from the Wiltshire VCH team. We're delighted to have you in our audience. Second, many of you, Jean requires no introduction, but for those who've not met or heard her before, here are a few personal observations. Since 2008, she's led a team of mainly volunteers, including myself, who've been researching parishes in North East Hampshire, including Basingstoke, the new Victoria County History Project. In this role, Jean has led from the front as co-author of the first of what are known in the VCH jargon as, I've already indicated earlier, shorts. First of these, on the parish of Mapledurwell, was published in 2012, and with assistance from John Hare, a short on the parish of Steventon, which was published in 2016. And at present, Jean's actively engaged in researching the parishes of Newnham, Up-Nately and Nately Scures. As leader, Jean encourages and exhorts us and also participates in the activities of a group of volunteers who've been transcribing wills. And lastly, with assistance from a number of team members, she liaises with the Institute of Historical Research at the University of London, which oversees the VCH project. Formerly a senior lecturer at the University of Winchester, since retiring, Jean has been a visiting research fellow in history at the university. As VCH Hampshire leader, is eminently qualified to speak to us this evening on the subject of parish histories. So, over to you, Jean.
Okay, thank you. I'll do my best to talk about the VCH. Okay, it started 120 years ago. It's a national project. What I'd like to start off by doing is talking briefly about the history of VCH, and then the main part of tonight, the hands-on chapters for parishes in the VCH style, and finally the volunteer experience of working on this project. Okay, it started in 1899 in Victoria's reign, hence the name. People have suggested we should change the name, but you know, it gives our origins as a project. It was dedicated to Queen Victoria for her Diamond Jubilee, rededicated in 2012 to our Queen for her Diamond Jubilee. And a book was published, which is on the side, about the VCH to celebrate our Queen's Diamond Jubilee. The main book, as Roger showed you, is the Red Book. It's the hallmark of the VCH for 100 years. And the idea was that every parish of England should be described by the VCH after 1899. And there were some general volumes as well about nature and the economy and religion. Hampshire has lots of firsts in this. The first ever VCH volume was Hampshire 1, published in 1900. And Hampshire indeed was one of the very few counties who did every parish by 1914. So you might say, why are we here? Because they were very old-fashioned entries, just manorial descent, charities, and mainly the Church of England, aimed at wealthy customers. It was always designed to be a prestigious project. On the steering committee, to begin with, there were 10 aristocrats, 2 bishops, the president of the Royal Society, the president of the OS, the president of the Portrait Gallery, and the Regius Professors of History at Oxford and Cambridge. I don't think they did anything, but it was to give the project a high sort of style. One person VCH is really grateful to is one of the initial editors. For 30 years, William Page led the VCH, and he really set the style of the VCH. He employed men and women, but especially women, to go through all the indexes at the Public Record Office and write out slips for every single parish in England. There's a slip for each entry, They were collected at the end of every day, and then they were given to the county editors. So if an editor comes to do research, he doesn't need to go through masses and masses of indexes. All the slips are there for him to work on. It was very, very successful. And indeed, all these notes are in Southampton University Library archives, and they're quite useful to consult to this day if one's working on the project. In 1933, Page wasn't well, and he decided to transfer the whole of the Victoria County history to the Institute of Historical Research in the University of London, where it remains to this day. And it became a public project rather than the initial commercial project as a result. Okay, where does VCH work these days? Red counties are active. You can see we're active, Isle of Wight isn't, Cornwall's active, Devon isn't. These are the active counties. The grey counties have at least one volume of VCH. There's only one, in fact, that has none, that's Northumberland. And that was really because it had a really good county history in 1899 and never saw the point and has never joined in. But all the other counties have at least one entry. In fact, West Riding's only got one county, but all the red counties are active to this day. Each county has a small staff, or had a small staff of professional historians working on the project. And that was the style up to the 21st century. 21st century, let's jump ahead. There were many innovations, one of which was England's Past for Everyone, which is a project important in setting up our project. The VCH needed cash. That's the case many times. It's always short of funds. And in 1999, they approached the National Memorial Fund, the predecessor of the Heritage Lottery Fund, for money, really to do red books. But the Heritage Lottery Fund doesn't finance existing projects. It wanted a new project and it wanted volunteers involved in it. So the VCH recruited 250 volunteers across these counties that are marked. Research, transcribe, analyse the census, transcribe wills, study buildings, record landscapes, buildings, boundaries, working with professional historians. And indeed, this is the model used by VCH Hampshire. And it led to 15 paperbacks being published, much more populist than red books. And work started in some counties, such as Cornwall, which have been dormant for many, many years. And these are typical EPE books. Bristol about ethnic minorities. Cornwall, there's this one about the coast and fishing. And also there's one on religion for Cornwall. And leading directly on from this project, John Beckett was the director of the VCH in London. And he was asked by the University of London to encourage new VCH work in different counties. And one thing he did was approach Hampshire. And many of you may know about this. He approached the County Council, Hampshire Field Club, Hampshire Archives Trust, the Record Office, the University of Portsmouth, Southampton and Winchester, and suggested a VCH project on the style of EPE using volunteers to do the work. Because of course, as usual, there's no cash to pay people to do it. And this group, in fact, manages the VCH project in Hampshire. Hampshire got some more firsts. First to rewrite existing parish histories. The first county batch which had completed the histories to start again and rewrite them. And the first to use volunteers working with professional historians to write VCH parish histories. So we have lots of firsts we can be proud of in Hampshire. But what we have to remember is it's a national project. It's not just Hampshire. The aspects to explore of every parish history are set down by HQ. You use primary sources. It's essentially a project dependent on primary sources. You're even told not to look at secondary sources till you've studied the primary ones. Held in local record offices, national, college, private record offices from about 1066 to the present day. Trainings given, we give training within Hampshire, London does as well. Obviously in the pandemic we can't have normal workshops, but some of them are on Zoom. The idea is that parish histories across the whole of England are directly comparable, and also that they contribute to a developing body of knowledge about rural and urban history. So if you want to work for VCH, you've got to accept these rules. If you want to choose which aspects of the parish you want to record, VCH is not for you. But all the work done for VCH can also be used for other publications. So if you particularly like one aspect that doesn't treat in detail with VCH, you can write that up later and use it for your own work. Okay, main part of my talk, actual hands-on parish histories. As I said, VCH covers the period from 1066 to the present day. You'll find a bias in mind, though, toward the early modern period, because that's the period I like best and the one I've sort of specialised in. So what are we doing and what's different from the old? The old, you can see descents of leading families, advowsons for churches, architectural descriptions of Church of England churches and charities. The new, the most important, of course, is that we now use Hampshire Record Office. There were not county record offices in 1914. They're really a product of after the Second World War. So most of our research is done locally now, which really widens the scope of what we can do. There's an introduction to every parish with the boundaries, the landscape, settlement, and in particular, vernacular buildings, local housing, which distinguish the particular parish. Land ownership is much like the old manorial descent. Economic and social history, including the lives of ordinary people, and that's a big change from the original ones 100 years ago. Religious history includes nonconformity and Roman Catholicism, and local government, which for the parish is a very short section, but for Basingstoke, obviously a much more important section. Now we get to the crunch. VCH Central Office specifies the template of what you must study in each parish history. It's 45 pages long. It sets out everything that one needs to look at. Perhaps even worse, the style guidelines on abbreviations and footnotes and things like that is 114 pages long, and it can irritate people working on the system. But we know it's a national project and everything's got to look the same from different counties. Both of these are on the website, the VCH website, and it's under writing for the VCH. So anyone, in fact, can write a VCH parish history, provided they use the instructions in these two guides. The parish itself meant ecclesiastical parish until 1894 and civil parish once they're set up after 1894. Okay, we chose the Basingstoke region and the surrounding rural parishes because Basingstoke had been transformed since the initial volumes were produced, largely by London overspill. There's also a side issue that the university had a house there, which it rented, used for teaching, and we used it for our meetings. It was called Shoot House, very convenient in the centre of the town, but sadly they gave the lease up and we had to find elsewhere. But now we're in the Discovery Centre, which is absolutely fine. What we were working on, though, in 2008 to 12, was Red Book parish entries. And as soon as a chapter or part of a chapter is completed, it was published on the Hampshire section of the VCH website, and the references are there. And we started initially with 2 volumes, one on Basingstoke itself and the other one on Old Basing, Steventon and the parishes between them. So any work done was aimed at a new Red Book. And eventually we were going to have a 3rd Red Book as well on the north of Basingstoke. Okay, and so we need to remember that all our early work was on that, because that's got a bit lost in the course of time. Because there was a huge innovation in 2012, which was already mentioned, the beginning of shorts. They're books published on one or more parish, combining Red Book content with more populist text. Don't ask me why they're called shorts. I asked the editor that yesterday. He said he didn't know. It was previous person who'd chosen the name, but they were shorter to read than Red Books. Anyway, we found shorts really useful. They really suit a volunteer project. They're still accurate, well researched, still from primary sources. You've got the Red Book content, but you've also got scope for more populist material. On average, the short parish history is about double the length of a Red Book. So there's much more scope to put in more populist things, interesting sources, and indeed the author's particular interests in the parish. So they're ideal for a volunteer project in that we actually do see fruition of our work long before a red book would have been published. The first short, I think we've already said, was Mapledurwell, written by Stan Waight, John Hare and me. It was the first ever VCH short, and so we're proud to be the first one. Basingstoke, a medieval town, shows how part of urban history can be in one short, and it contributes to debates about the role of small towns in the Middle Ages, and also, of course, confounds those who believe Basingstoke is a new town, that some people still do. Okay, what do we do in each parish history? The introduction covers boundaries, landscape, communication, settlement, vernacular buildings, and population. The chapters cover from Doomsday, sometimes before, but not much scope in Hampshire for that, except for archaeology, up to 2021. I'm just looking at one aspect now of the introduction, vernacular architecture. It combines the study of existing buildings. Mapledurwell was a classic example, with documentary sources. And we've been very grateful to Bill Fergie and Edward Roberts for helping us with this. Mapledurwell, held by Corpus Christi College in Oxford, and the estate records are excellent. And so we can see modern houses today that survive, and we can trace their records and really make a history of the property. Also using Basingstoke and Dean Conservation Area appraisal for Mapledurwell and Historic England Buildings List. Probate inventories can be considered because the estate archive lists the names of all tenants, so we can link tenants up to the building. This in fact is Rye Cottage on the illustration, which is a crook cottage. Manor Farm was the main tenant's farmhouse, and again we've got the existing building, and we can link it up with inventories which tell us about the person who actually lived there in 1663 and 1723, and show there's a hall still there within the manor house. And this is completely different from the initial VCH in that vernacular architecture was not considered. Okay, land ownership is much more similar to the old one, the manorial descent, we still have it. It's one chapter that we have actually paid people to do for us. Usually someone who just finished their PhD for a modest sum will write land ownership. It's mainly medieval. We don't have enough medievalists. John Hare and Alison Deverson are our only two medievalists. They can't do all of this work. So we have to pay people to do this. But there's also one lord of the manor who I find entertaining, if not horrifying though. We'll just focus on him for a moment. He's the worst one we've found so far. It's Apexel Brochus of Steventon, and he appears in Chancery and Star Chamber cases in the National Archives. And just read for yourself of his doings. Lots of illegitimate children. We are told he got servants to marry them when he got them pregnant. He stole glebe and tithes from the rectors of Steventon. One of his servants locked the church, no services could be held. And then parishioners broke in because they wanted to baptize a child and left the door open. And so cattle and sheep strayed in. In the end, he was excommunicated by the Archbishop of Canterbury, largely because of his adulteries. And his son by this stage had driven him out of Steventon in 1611, and his son took over as Lord of the Manor. But it's not just Jane Austen that makes Steventon famous. Okay, economic history, very important chapter in our parish histories, concerns agricultural landscape, estate management, farming, industry and commerce. Historians debate the impact of Lords of the Manor on farming and on production within a parish. Talk about resident and absentee, private and institutional or church landowners. So our studies can contribute to these debates, and we can look at resident, non-resident landowners and see what impact they had. We can look at active resident secular lords, for example, in Dummer, who kept manorial court rolls in Latin and English, detailing all their estate management for 200 years. We had great fun on Zoom trying to read the Latin court rolls as a group with mixed success. But non-resident, but very active in Steventon, later on, not in Brochus' time, and private and institutional ones in Newnham, who had little influence on the development of the estate. Let's start with Mapledurwell. It's a wonderful archive at Corpus Christi. This beautiful map is part of a book of maps, produced 1616, very early for estate maps, done by Langdon, shows every strip and the tenants of each strip. Absolutely beautiful map. And then you've got an archive which details every property and all the tenants, so you can link up with probate, and masses of estate records and letters as well, discussing properties and wood sales and problems with Quakers as tenants in the 17th century that the college didn't really like. So we really get, although Corpus Christi is in Oxford, they're very active in Mapledurwell and looking after the place, and the manorial court rolls show that as well. Stephen's got the best and the worst. We've already seen the worst in Apexel Brochus, but the Knight landowners from 1736 in particular were very business oriented, and they commercialised and restructured the practices in Steventon. They enclosed the land, they mapped it, they used lease covenants to manage the farms and the woods. And one example in 1741 of a lease covenant, the tenant had to improve fertility, he had to plough the common, he had to spread chalk, he had to use dung, and all dung had to be left in the farmyard at the last year of the lease. He also had to plant a new fodder crop called saffron, which was much more productive for animal feeding. And the Knight Archive in Hampshire Record Office is excellent for this. This is one of the maps from the Knight Archive, showing the end of the open fields just before they were enclosed in 1741. And some excellent maps in this archive, and lots of estate correspondence. Newnham's very different. The Paulet and Bolton lords protected their interests by collecting rents, but didn't do much else. They didn't promote good husbandry. Any improvements and innovations were left to the will of the tenant. And they'd lost control of 1/4 of the manor, at least by 1641. And you get bizarre leases. George Prince in 1727 was to maintain 3/4 of the manor house and 3/4 of the buildings. No rent was paid for the other quarter by 1800, and the manorial court had ceased to meet. Farming by tenants we largely get in the early modern period from wills and inventories, drawn up on the death of local people, record the farming, trade goods and household goods. It was administered by the church courts, for example, the consistory court at Winchester. And there's an image of an inventory. We'll come to some more that are easier to read in a moment. What we do see from the inventories is the impact of the chalk or the clay. On the chalk, sheep are more prevalent, and on the clay, much more so, cattle. Steventon is obviously mixed farming, arable and pasture, but there's a greater value of sheep, as we can see here, than cattle. The inventories are not of huge value. The average was £29, a range from 9 to 40. What I found interesting was daughters' dowries provided often in sheep. William Morrell in 1546 left each of his daughters 20 sheep as their dowry. Newnham was on the clay. John Russell was a wealthy yeoman in 1641. He'd 92 cattle valued at £92 and 30 sheep in total valued at £6. But he's the only farmer in Newnham in the first half of the 17th century who had any sheep at all listed in his inventory. And we can just look at a transcription of some of the inventory. If you look at the bottom of the left hand side, you've got a yoke of oxen, 10 calves, 1 bull, 15 cows, 3 fatting cows, 2 steers, 4 heifers, 4 other heifer bullocks and 1 steer bullock. And then he got heaps of chalk so he could actually use it on the clay soils. And you can see further down there sheep and lambs and his lease. He was a wealthy man, worth £312, a lot of money in those days when he died. Up-Nately was a mix of chalk and clay, and if you look carefully at this inventory, he had 302 sheep and 52 rather beasts, which were cattle, red cattle, also 18 horses, and crops, a lot of crops, in fact, worth £180. A very wealthy man in that inventory. Okay, wasn't just agriculture, also industry. The cloth industry is really important in this area until about 1650, when malting becomes more important. There's also some specialist industries. For example, Hook Mill was a paper mill for 100 years with goods worth £138 in 1743 in a case detailed in the National Archives. It produced lots of sorts of paper from white and blue rags, which it purchased in London and sold paper widely in this region, in Basingstoke, Winchester, Reading, Newbury and Blandford. And it was a very important industry for that 100-year period. Social history, we do social character, social life, education, charities and poor law. I just picked social character as an example in Nately Scures of seeing how you can link up probate with the hearth tax returns. And so you get quite a picture of each community in 1665. First of all, the wealthy end, the South family were the most prosperous. Widow South in 1665 had 7 hearths, the greatest number in Nately Scures. Her husband had died 5 years before, worth £350, very wealthy resident. And he had 2 houses, one in Nately Scures and one in the Holt. And in the Holt, he had malt, well, in the Holt and in London, he had malt valued at £44, showing the importance of the new malting industry. Sadly, he died intestate, he didn't leave a will, so we don't know whether he had a store in London or just sent up the malt to be sold. But he's a very important local man in 1660 when he died. We've also got the poorer end of the scale. 5 people had only 2 hearths, including John Petto. He died worth £23 with cattle, corn and other goods. His actual household goods were just 1 table, 1 bed, and the bed meant the mattress, 1 bedstead, 1 chest, and his wearing clothes, which were valued at only 2 shillings or 10p in modern money. A further 2 were taxed on 1 hearth and 3 were not taxed, of whom 2 had only 1 hearth. All the small properties seem to be in Hook Village or enclosures on the edge of Hook or Scures Common. There's very few in Nately Scures with only 1 hearth, whereas in Newnham there were 22 1-hearth properties and a further 11 that were not taxable. This is just to show you an inventory of someone worth only £5. It's quite rare to get them for under £5 because the church courts that administered them couldn't charge if they were valued at less than £5. So they didn't encourage making them. And then they charged on a sliding scale above £5. And you can see the things that he's got. A table, another table of cupboard stools, tongs, a fire shovel, frying pan, bellows, pot hooks, candlesticks, pottingers, a saucer, a pot, a kettle, flock beds, not feather beds. You know, the rich had feather beds even at this period, but they're flock beds if they were poor, bolsters and blankets. And for cattle, he got 7 ewes, 7 tegs, 2 wethers, 1 cow, 1 bullock, and 2 pigs. So inventories go down quite low in the social scale and are very useful for giving us the social structure of local society. Local government, a very small section in most parishes apart from Basingstoke. 100 courts were the major court for the region in the medieval period and the early modern. Newnham was in Basingstoke, 100 court. They enforced the law, especially to protect local farming. And they had punishments, and Newnham, in fact, didn't make the stocks properly, and in 1540 was fined because they had no stocks for the punishment of evildoers. And they were ordered to have a set of stocks made before the next court, which indeed they must have done because they certainly weren't fined in the next court. If you don't know it, Bajent and Millard is a brilliant book, published in 1889, 400 court records. You can find lots of detail about parishes and wrongdoers in the area of the 100 of Basingstoke from the book without having to go back to the originals. And it's a tight script of the originals, so you can use it quite happily. Okay, religion. Church of England, Nonconformists, Roman Catholics, churches and chapels, using sources from the Record Office, the National Archives, British Library, and the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. I'm just picking on, first of all, the Church of England. two unusual rectors in Newnham. In most parishes, the Lord of the Manor appointed the rector. They owned the abowson, but that wasn't the case in Newnham and Mapledurwell. The abowson, for historic reasons, was owned by Queen's College in Oxford, who were very royalist. And you can see this in two of the rectors. Richard Featherstone, appointed briefly in 1519, was a man of strong Catholic faith, just at the time when Henry VIII is moving towards the Reformation. He was opposed to Henry VIII's Reformation. He was a tutor to Princess Mary, chaplain to Catherine of Aragon, but he stood out and opposed the royal divorce and Henry VIII's assumption of the title of Supreme Head of the Church. As a result, he was sent to the Tower and hung and quartered in 1540. But he wasn't the only one of really royalist or sympathies at Newnham. The one that really amazes me is James Potter, a chaplain of Queen's who became rector at Newnham in 1654. He's an ardent royalist who'd been sequestrated by the Westminster Assembly from Binfield in Berkshire for great malignancy. And what did that consist of? He'd actually stood up and preached in Binfield Church that anyone who died fighting for Parliament in the Civil War had no hope of salvation. And yet in 1654, in the middle of Oliver Cromwell's protectorate, he's appointed to Newnham. I was amazed by that. I don't suppose Cromwell knew anything about it, but nonetheless, I'm quite surprised he was appointed. We don't just have the Church of England, though. We look at nonconformists. Quakers are important in the 17th century, especially at Alton. And in Mapledurwell, there were a number of Quakers, some of whom were really rich, like Roger Smith, who was one of the principal landowners in Mapledurwell. And he wanted to be buried in Alton at the Quaker burial place. Methodists and Congregationalists established themselves in the area in the 19th and 20th centuries. For example, at this tin tabernacle in Steventon. The congregation varied from 45 but went down to 7 and services stopped in 1973. Okay, that's my canter through hands-on and local parishes, but we're talking about a volunteer project and volunteer experience. So I talked with the volunteers about what they thought about working for VCH, and their ideas are expressed in the next few slides. We meet, as I think Roger said, normally we meet on Wednesdays, 1 week in Basingstoke Discovery Centre, the other week in Hampshire Record Office. Currently all on Zoom. We meet every Wednesday on Zoom. Will's group works in the morning. I'll say more about that in a moment. Then in the afternoon we have talks and discussions. We also do individual research when Hampshire Record Office, but can support each other in that. Research is also done in the National Archives, British Library, Oxford Colleges and private repositories. We always welcome new volunteers, so if any of you would like to join us, my email's on the final slide, do join us. We have no central funding, all is raised locally. Okay, Will's group is pretty important to the project in that we read wills and inventories for all our parishes between 1500 and 1700. The person actually working on the parish carries on after 1700. The script's okay to read on your own. At 1500 to 1700, we often need a group effort to read it. We're currently working on Zoom on images supplied by the Record Office for Sheffield on Loddon. What Will's group does is lets us all develop our paleography skills so we can read other documents for individual research. But, as you've probably picked up, it's critically important for economic and social history of ordinary people in the early modern period. The preambles to wills also are good for religious history. I mean, in the Reformation, they indicate Catholic or Protestant and Puritan allegiance in the 17th century. Okay, what sort of skills do we have? You can work on your own as a researcher or in a group. You can work on a whole parish or on parts of Basingstoke. You can work on archaeology, just a part of the parish, archaeology, education, nonconformity, census analysis, which is critically important for economic and social history in the 19th century. Some members of the group have to be able to read 16th, 17th century handwriting and indeed Latin, which is a bit of a challenge to all of us. Mine was O-level in 1964, but documents up to 1733, legal documents are in Latin, so we do have to manage them. Everyone needs patience. Sue Lane, joint author of Cliddesden, Hatch and Farley Wallop, and the forthcoming Dummer, says patience is absolutely essential as both books have taken at least 5 years to produce. Other skills we need are photography, publicity, fundraising. I'm sure there's many more. What do the volunteers find satisfying? They say it's interesting, it's challenging, it keeps the brain active. It's good to be part of a national and respected project. Satisfying to sort order out of numerous sources. It's a sociable and supportive project. Authors share texts. We put them up on the screen normally at Basingstoke, and we all look at each other's work. And because people live locally, make really useful comments about the text and get everyone's understanding of the area. Normally, we also go to London for county meetings. They've stopped because of the pandemic, but they do a number of workshops on Zoom for training. And as I said much earlier on, Hampshire was the first county to use volunteers to write parish histories. But now it's the norm for most counties. There's very few have got professional historians, apart from Oxfordshire and Wiltshire. And if they have, it tends to be on contract rather than permanent employees. Normally we go out on group visits. Again, that's been a bit hampered in the last year. And that's one to Newnham. Many years ago, Gustav Waight was leading it. And sadly, he died quite a few years ago. Publicity. You've seen our newsletter, but there's another one. Jane Austen, of course, was born in Steventon. She went to Balls in Basingstoke. She lived in Chawton at the end of her life. We put the newsletters out twice a year. They're published and distributed by Barbara Large. We're all very grateful to her for putting it all together. I think they're useful. You can see at the top right there an exhibition that we did in the Record Office. No, in basically the Discovery Centre before that. Immediately before that, we did one in the Record Office. We get publicity through book launches. This is Cliddeston in December of 2018, trying to sell lots and lots of books, in that we need book sales for finance, quite clearly, and it's been very difficult in the last year. That's setting up the exhibition in HRO, great fun. Took us all day to get it set up, but it was there from October 2016 to January of 2017. So lots of people could see it, and we did make a few more recruits to our team as a result of it. Now, 2019 was the 120th anniversary of the VCH. London asked every active county to fill a red box the size of a red book with objects representing the county. We decided to do it for the Basingstoke area, not the whole county. But these were then taken up to London and then displayed in the Institute of Historical Research in October of 2019 with a great fun launch party, which many of us went to. And that's the Hampshire box. You can see the Hampshire hog. You can see Wallace and Stevens steamroller, the mighty Anto of Thornycroft's, musket balls from Basinghouse, including a squashed one, being fired. You can see Northanger Abbey. There's a teasel and wall, Burberry shooting coat info, and a bit of, well, not really Burberry gabardine, but we pretended it was Burberry gabardine. Okay, so you get a feel for what we had in our box, and that was us visiting for the exhibition, fortunately just before all this pandemic started. Sadly though, the boxes are still in London. They were displayed from October of 2019, and we were supposed to get them back at the March meeting of 2020, which of course was cancelled because of the pandemic, and they're all sitting in the Institute, which has been shut for a year, and hopefully one day we'll get ours back. So what about the future? We've got 4 forthcoming shorts. Dummer is actually in active process. It's past peer review. All our books have to be edited by central office by London, and then go to peer review of an academic from a different institution who reads them and makes sure they're up to the standard of the VCH. Dummer's past that, but both central office and the peer reviewer make suggestions as to what you could change. And Sue Lane and Jenny Butler and John Hare are all involved in putting in those amendments. And of course, it's been hampered by the pandemic and the Record Office being shut and the National Archives being shut. Heriot's a bit different. We're actually paying someone, a VCH author, to finish the chapters in that, because the archive is just so immense in the record office that it needed someone to help us to do it, or else it never got through it. And Hap very generously made a grant towards the costs of that. But again, of course, his research has been held up. We've got one chapter that he's completed, but he hasn't been able to do research either. A bit different is Basingstoke 1800 to 1925, in that nearly all the volunteers were involved in that. Nearly all of us have written bits of it. At some stage left to be edited. It's not finished because, again, of the closures, but the text basically will follow the same sort of chapter headings of the introduction and the manorial descent, economic and social history. Politics will be more important than it would be in a parish history, and religious history. And as I said, virtually all of us have been involved in that. Some of it's up on the website, the VCH website. Okay. And finally, Newnham, Nately, Scures, and Up-Nately. Stan Waight worked on that, what, 10 years ago or so. And John Hare and I have picked it up. But the timetable for all of these has slipped because of the pandemic and because we couldn't finish and we couldn't complete our research. Okay. What's our target for the future? New red books, well, it's still always there, but you'd need a paid county editor to produce them. It's a huge amount of work. If we're going to go to red books, we need massive amounts of fundraising. It doesn't seem very likely in the near future. Our funds have suffered this year, no events at which to sell books and no occasion for fundraising. But shorts suit us as a volunteer project. They suit the Hampshire style. If we're not planning a short on a particular place, we can still do the research and do the writing, and it can be published as work in progress on the VCH website. And in fact, if you want to look at work in progress on the VCH website, there are chapters for many of our parishes. For Newnham, Nately, Scures, Up-Nately. There's work on lots on Basingstoke, some on Winslade. Many other parishes are up there. It's well worth having a look. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Was great, Jean. Thank you so much. And it certainly inspired me as a relative newcomer to the project. And I only hope that one or two people in the audience might have been moved to contact you and made a note of your email address. Should you have missed that and want to make contact with Jean, you can always contact myself or Barry, me through Barry, and I will pass on Jean's contact details to you. Does anyone in our audience have any questions for Jean? Okay, we've got a first question I can see just come up on the chat button, which is the method we would like you to use. Paula Bailey is asking, could you say a little bit more about census analysis, Jean?
Yes, we do a lot of census analysis. I mean, as I said, I majored on the early modern period, but from 1841 to 1901 and indeed even 1911, we analysed the census for economic and social history chapters. Particularly for economic, we look at occupation. We actually analyse the occupations by occupation codes, so we can group them together, like everyone to do with farm labouring, everyone to do with shops, everyone to do with production. And so that really helps us to write the economic history section, in that we can see how many farms there are. And in 1851 and 61, they actually say how many workers worked at each farm and how many acres they were, and it's really useful for writing the economic history. For social history, we look at one thing we look at is how many servants people had and whether they have specialist servants like butlers. It's very rare in this area that was the case, but it gives you a feel for who were the wealthy people, who were the movers and shakers, if you like, in a particular parish. We also look at the poor, in that not everyone who was poor wound up in the workhouse. You can be a pauper receiving out relief at home, and that comes out very clearly on the census. And one of the other things we look at is where people travel from, whether they were local residents or whether they moved into Basingstoke or Basing, Newnham, Dummer, wherever it might be. And we look to see what proportion of the population actually came from elsewhere into that parish. And by looking at where the children were born, you can see how much they moved around. And we often do the analysis as a group. Someone transcribes the census into Excel, and then we go through it, allocating codes as a group so that it makes it easier to write up the topic. Answer the question.
A number of questions have been coming in of you been speaking, Jean, on the chat button. One of them is from Pauline Hedges, Newnham Parish Council. She's asking if help is still needed with Newnham. I'm not sure, would you say what point you've reached with the Newnham
Newnham is in draft, but it's always useful to have local people. I see Nigel's here, and Nigel certainly helped me with work on Newnham, but it's always useful to have the input of local people. So if anyone wants to get in touch with me, do. There is a draft, but you know, you could read it and comment on it, and Nigel's already done that for some of the chapters very helpfully to us.
Right. There have been some very positive comments. There's been a request about how a person could obtain the short, which includes Farley Wallop, the Gliddesden, Farley Wallop, etc. Short.
Email me and I'll send you a copy.
Okay. It might be useful, Jean, if you could just say your email address at this point, so that anybody that's got a specific question, a precise question, can go direct to you when this session ends. So could you just tell us your email address?
Yeah, it's Jean Morring, all one word, all lowercase, no dots, at outlook.com.
Okay, Jean Morring, all one word, at outlook.com.
And I'm sure that we can sell you any of the shorts at £10, including post and packaging, if you've been along to this talk, because we do discount rates for Hatton Hampshire Field Club anyway. Mapledurwell's cheaper than that. Mapledurwell, including post and packaging, will be about £7. But email me if you want them. I can send them to you.
From the horse's mouth.
You'd have to send me a check because we don't have any. Oh, or would we? I think you'd have to send me a check. It's probably the easiest, yeah.
Right.
But email me, I'll give you my address. Just have you copies.
Right. There's a specific question about the hearth tax from Lynn Richardson. You mentioned the number of hearths. Was this also a way of setting taxes? Could you just, right.
Sorry, Roger, could you just repeat that? Was it a way of doing what?
Setting taxes.
Yes, indeed. I mean, in 1660, when Charles II was restored to the English throne, this is a volume, Hampshire Records Series volume on the hearth tax for every single parish. It's well worthwhile. The Record Office sell it. It lists every single parish in Hampshire and the names of people and how many hearths they had. And yes, you would. Most households were taxed. The very poorest were untaxed. But it was a means of raising cash for Charles II because the money given to the monarch wasn't enough. I mean, Charles I did many bad things, but it was quite true he didn't have enough cash. And when Charles II became king, hearth tax was a means of getting tax. And it was easy to calculate because if you taxed on the number of hearths in a house, then anyone could check and see how many you had. And therefore, it was an easy way to raise tax. And it lasted till the 1690s.
Okay, there's a question from Barry. In a changing world, do you think a fully electronic product is likely to be the future for the VCH?
You can get all the shorts electronically. You can buy them from London from the website electronically. It's a debate that goes on and on. With Central Office, it's been raised many, many times. A lot of people still like to have books in their hands. I don't know is the answer to that one, really. But it is one that London is very aware of. And you can get it electronically. Right,
good. Thank you, Jean. One or two very positive comments. Thank you for a very interesting talk. Debbie Reevell is if I may read her comment, it's an amazing project and has hugely raised the quality of local history, certainly in Basingstoke. And I think that would be true of the surrounding parishes. So we're very pleased with, I'm sure, very pleased with that comment. Glenn Gilbertson is saying, thanks for the talk. We're about to publish a new collaborative history of Alresford. Should we aim to produce a version conforming to VCH? And he then makes the comment, which we heard many times, oh, and isn't the Hampshire hog a yearling sheep, not a
yes,
pig?
yes, we know that, but we went along with it, yeah. I mean, Alresford, it's up to them. I mean, but they can certainly look on the VCH website and get all the details of how to write a parish template. Whether you want to follow the VCH style is really up to you. But if you go on to Victoria County History, which sits on the Institute of Historical Research website, and it's a bit clunky because, like everything else, back in March of 2020, they were redoing the website, and the Institute's been shut, and progress has really stopped on redoing the website. So you have to be a bit patient with it, but you can find everything. And it's got a section called Writing for the VCH, and this template, which I do have somewhere. Mine's rather some template for writing parish histories. It's well worth having a look at it and seeing whether you want to follow what it suggests. I think it's a very useful template, and it is a style that's recognised throughout the country.
Would it be a useful contribution, really, was the question. Our history will be thoroughly researched and referenced.
Why not? Yes.
It'd be helpful.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't say it would be accepted as a VCH text because I'm not VCH editor, but if you want to get it in VCH style, then you can contact the central VCH editor and discuss it with him. He's quite happy to discuss things. But it's not. I can't tell you whether it would be acceptable. I'm not the. We edit within the county, but not nationally.
Right. I think that is the end of the questioning, Jean. And I thank you once again for a very informative talk, putting a lot of what we're doing into the wider context. As I said earlier, I hope it's inspired some of the audience maybe to think about possibly contacting you just to discuss what might be possible and what one might do. There have been some very positive comments coming in on the chat side. So thank you once again, Jean, and thanks to everyone for attending today. It was a record attendance, which is really great. I look forward to seeing Jean tomorrow afternoon when we're
on Zoom again.
Zoom again, and hearing all about the enclosures in Hampshire. So, good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.